Well then, people, those folk in, a lot of people saying real life, 8 billion people on this planet now, 2023, it's crazy, right? It's almost the end of the year. By far, I haven't been streaming lately. It's been a couple years since I've even touched the face of YouTube, just to past high school. High school is, in my opinion, the most important thing slash not. It really it can help you. It's a process to test how hardworking you are, in my opinion. But today I'm going to tell you a story, and it is by far the most intriguing of one of my most favorite games ever. It is Dark Souls. Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. We're not gonna tap into Elden Ring here. I know. It's crazy, right? But it just doesn't seem right for me to, get into that. It just doesn't seem right. It's not fair. So we're just going to stick with the 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So I'm gonna be having a entire my opinion based, okay? So anyone else's opinion, it's okay, but it's not going to affect mine, okay? Because this is a, what's stored in here, my brain, okay? I can't access y'all's thoughts, I don't think like everyone else, so I'm gonna be only using what's in my brain right now. So, Dark Souls 2, 3, and 1. Okay. When I was a kid, my first Souls game was Dark Souls 2. Still, till today, is my favorite. Okay. Because how much more it gave compared to the other two games, other 1 and 3. So in Dark Souls 2, unlike the bonfire where you were able to travel using the Lord Vessel in Dark Souls 1, it was kind of rough because you got there like mid game at best. And then at Dark Souls 3 was already given to you for free because people thought it was more faster, better, you know? But in Dark Souls 2, it was easier because it had a progress, a thing where it was you were able to ascend the bonfire levels to New Game 10, at least, basically, from 1 to 10 by using the item so gracefully given by the producers Miyazaki trusted, and they made a broken game into a perfect game. I don't know why there's hate on Dark Souls 2. Still my favorite. Still one of the most difficult because um they just jump you. So I will explain that later. But for now, we're talking about the bonfire mechanic. So basically, bonfire aesthetic. You burn that on the bonfire. Everything around you in that certain area gets resetted. Perfect. So just for in case you need some items, bonfire aesthetic. Just snap it on there and just rip it in. Beautiful. So basically, that's the cool thing about Dark Souls 2. Now, and Dark Souls 1 and 3, you don't have that. You just don't. You had to you defeat your boss, and then you go to new game, okay, to fight it again. You can't fight it again at all. And unless they're duplicated bosses like, reused. And somewhere in the game, like in the DLC, let's say a Dark Souls 3, Dragon Slayer armor, the cool one, and then there was the one that was reused for its armor set because they thought it was a good idea to fight the boss and not give its armor after you fight it. So they're like, oh, never mind. We're just gonna give you its soul for its weapon and axe, hammer, whatever that thing he wields. I haven't played that game in a while. I've been playing too much Dark Souls 2, as you could tell. Actually, haven't played that in a while either. Jeez, getting a job, it takes its toll on you. So basically, let me get back to it. Kind of sick, you know what I'm saying? Human things. Some people of the superior race think that they are above sickness, but when they get the common cold near winter, they just simply perish. But back to the Dark Souls 2 argument. So basically, um, it got darker. Hold on. There we go. Hold on. My TV turned off. As you can tell, I am in a dark room at 12 o'clock at night. It's I don't even know if it's 12, 11, 1. I can't tell. I'm recording. I can't tell. I can't even check my timer right now. But let's go back to Dark Souls. So basically, Dark Souls 2 has these mechanics where throughout the game, unlike the other Souls games where there's separated enemies, one by one, separated enemies, you come to find out that in Dark Souls 2 it becomes a little harder because there are enemies at all jumped up in one room, just one room each, and it's just like a big layer full of like room, and you're like, wow, it's just me, and all these enemies have a sword way bigger than mine. Like most of the enemies in Dark Souls 2 have a sword your body length, and they have all these unique movesets that can reach you everywhere. So compared to you, it makes you feel tiny. Unlike in Dark Souls 1 and 3, where you just fought big things, but they were like, they were certain paced. Like in Dark Souls 1, slow paced, and Dark Souls 3, fast paced. But you can just adapt to it very easily, uncompared like Dark Souls 2, where your character was in between, but you were still able to you were able to get hit easier because these enemies, they had unique weapons, and you were able to acquire those weapons throughout the game. But even though you acquire them, you can't seem to grasp how the enemies use them. So, like, for example, let's say a undead spearman comes at you, starts poking at you, and you're starts using his moveset, and he uses it his way. Your character can't really get that because the default attack pattern, it doesn't match. So he's just simply better with the spear than you. You kind of just suck at it. It's an everyone problem at the moment. So just he's got to deal with it. But basically, throughout this game, your character's just tiny, small. You're a pygmy. Let me remind you, you aren't the chosen undead or the Ashen One, where you have this significant amount of power among every other creature in the game. You're just an undead. You die once, you turn hollow instantly. Unlike in Dark Souls 1, where it did the same thing, but you're the chosen undead. You have a higher tolerance, and you have the power of consuming literally the dark soul, your dark soul. You had a thing called humanity, which, let me remind you, in Dark Souls 2 and 3, you weren't able to acquire that because in Dark Souls 3 you were an ash. You literally made of ash, bonfire bone ash, which is a funny thing, is that an acquirable item in Dark Souls 2, which is called I think it's undead bone ash, where basically you burn it and you can upgrade your Estus, unlike using Estus shards in other games. And the other two, where you use an Estus shard and you buff your Estus, we use undead bone shards of undead that perished from the previous battles. But the cool thing is, unlike basically the Ashen One, where he's in ash, full of ash. That's why when you kindle at the bonfire, when you die, you spawn there, but you spawn from the ash from the bonfire. You weren't really a person or an undead. You're not even a being, actually. You were just just ash made from a bonfire. But people can argue like, oh, but when in Dark Souls 3, don't you just come out the grave? Well, you are bone ashes. You are the bones of a previous dead being. You have no memory of what you were. So, because, you haven't went through a hollowing process. You can't hollow. Like in Dark Souls 3, you can't hollow when you die. When you die, you're still your human version. Unless you go through that one questline where then you can hollow. But that's when you get affected by the curse. Which, remember, your character isn't a human. It is Ash. That's why they call you Ashen One. It's pretty simple. But then next, And then Dark Souls 1, you are the chosen undead. Let me remind you, the chosen undead literally had a prophecy from the beginning of the game where it said one day a chosen undead would escape this asylum and break out, and then venture among Lordran to go fight past, ring both the bells, go to Anor Londo, city of the gods, by the way, and fight through, conquer that, receive the Lord Vessel, and then after that, you get to then use the Lord Vessel to collect all of the Lord Souls to access Lord Gwyn to slay him and then kindle the bliff to kindle the fire. Literally the whole prophecy. It's from Framth himself. It literally it tells you it. So you were destined to win. You weren't destined to lose ever. So unless you chose the dark ending, but still you still win in a way. You just turn off the flame. And technically that ending isn't, I would say, canon. They just put it in there to have a bad ending because if there's some lore reasons, but basically the final boss in Dark Souls 3 is you from Dark Souls 1 because you kindled the flame and slayed Lord Gwyn. That's why the final boss in Dark Souls 3 changes throughout weapons, because that's what you used as a loadout in Dark Souls 1. It's all coming together, basically. The Lord of Cinder is you. And that's why he can use lightning, because let me remind you, when you defeated Gwyn, you got Sunlight Spear from his soul. And basically, the reason why he can change it to his weapon is because, remember, when you kindled the flame, it was from all the lords that kindled the flame beforehand. But let me remind you, all the lords from Dark Souls 3 only stepped into the flame to burn it for another, period of 1,000 years. 1,000 years is a long time. And all those lords, lived very long. That's why no one from Dark Souls 1, still is alive, because it's been 1,000 years. More than that, there's a lot of lords, like let's say Aldrich. We have that's not Logri. It's that little the little guy, the little guy you can use to make boss weapons in Dark Souls 3. He's a lord. He stepped in there, and some funny thing is, I like when he, he tells us that he was once a very mighty person. So it makes us picture that he was like this strong man that stepped into the fire and then lost all of his muscle. It was a cute thing. But basically, him, then we have Lothric and Lorien, which didn't kindle flame, by the way. Let me remind you of that. I don't think they did, because that's why they still have the disease. The reason why Lorien's crippled is because he's sharing the curse among his brother Lothric. And then we have Yorm and the Abyss Watchers. In my opinion, they should have Dark Souls 3. And when you play these Souls games, in Dark Souls, the reason why let's go back to Dark Souls 2. Let me explain. So in Dark Souls 2, your character is not just little and has a really good upgraded bonfire, but throughout this game, you have what is called a growth for an iron will that you have to get throughout as you play this game, because in this game they literally they tell you already that once you meet the witches and the firekeepers, the old firekeepers in that one house, as soon as you spawn into the game, they tell you that they try to comfort you, because when you start the game, you think you are they tell you, you think you're gonna win, okay, and that's what you think in every game. Let me remind you, most games are pretty easy. Okay, you of course have you're gonna win. You know you're gonna lose sometimes, but you know that you're gonna win later on, and that's what drives you. But in Dark Souls 2, they straight up just tell you no, no, you are going to lose all your souls, which is the currency. You're gonna lose um you're gonna lose everything, even your mind, even your mind, and that's what happens, and it's crazy on how that is true so much in the game because basically sorry basically throughout this game you just die over and over and over again because your character wasn't built, wasn't meant for this prophecy, it wasn't set for anything. Because as you go throughout this game, you meet a bunch of people just like you, a bunch of people just like you, and like the Crestfallen, that that's up near Majula. You meet the ladder guy, Laddersmith Gilligan, and you meet a bunch like even the blacksmith in as well as the merchant far away. And you meet all these NPCs that you're bringing all the way to Majula from all these lands. And still, let me remind you that once you enter Drangleic, it is told that you forget everything. All these characters that you meet, they tell you that they've entered this land and forgot where they came from. And soon or later, they just get stuck in Drangleic. Like I think at first they tell you their purpose, but then they forget it. As they tell you, but so you know, but then they forget. They're like, "Oh, I told you that? Huh? Come to think of it, I don't remember telling you that." And then you start seeing that they're forgetting. So long you're in, because let me remind you, Dark Souls 2 is not put in Lordran. It's actually in a entirely different land, and this place is you forget things. Like let's say let's Lucatil of Mira and her brother came to find came to this land and then forgot where they came from. But let me remind you, they forgot what their goal was. They didn't forget where they were because let me remind you, they had armor that explained where they were of Mira. And Mira is actually a place in Lordran from far away. Because if you see in Dark Souls 3, don't quote me on this because I actually don't know where Mira is, but I know that it should be near in Lordran because it is a place just like Astora, you know? It's the Mira, Astora, and the other kingdoms that hosted these, great swordsmen, as well as Katarina, Katarina the Onion Knights. No, I love the Onion Knights, Sigurd, Sieglind, and Sigmire. But basically, when you enter this land, you forget everything. Okay? And that's what your character is. You just don't know where you're at. And people are like, in Dark Souls 2, I hate it because the multiplayer, there is not there's a soul memory that I had to stay near my friend's soul memory so I could play with them. Which in my opinion, yes, of course, it is a bad mechanic, but that shouldn't stop you from playing the game. That's the reason why it was supposed to be hard, was so you can play by yourself. Because in my opinion, Dark Souls 2 holds just more than, you don't need a friend to play it. You can, sit back and play this game. And in my opinion, I would rather play by myself, actually, now that I think about it, than play with someone else on Dark Souls 2. Because it was just such a wonderful experience the first time I played it. And multiple playing times as well. Let me remind you, I have 250 hours on multiple characters I'm pretty sure I have 6 characters in my total lifetime that have 250 to 300 hours on this game, which is beautiful because I've never experienced such beauty in in this game. It is awesome. And I would love because I grew up with this game and it just holds dear to my heart. To some people it's like, oh, it's a horrible game, has horrible mechanics, it's slow, and the spells aren't good, and when I hit there's durability on my weapons and they break so easily. Let me remind you that Dark Souls 2 isn't in Lordran, and everything it tells you, even off the story, as you go through the game, everything is breaking down, everything's losing purpose, and you are but, and you see like these kingdoms in ruined. So you have to realize where you're at. Let's think of it as if you were the character, what you have to work with. And that's what I always thought about when I was playing Dark Souls 2. Like, as if I was my own character. Where am I? I had to feel what he feels. I had to feel what they were going through. So when I started the game, I was like, so I have a let's say I started out as a a knight. Okay? I have armor. I have a sword. And I have a shield. Okay, but that's not a starter class in the game. But let's say let's say actually no. Let's say I started. I think there was a class where it's like Vanguard or not. I don't know. But you start out with the broadsword and you start out with pretty light leather armor, basically. Don't start with them chainmail or anything, but you start out with a decent stat. So throughout this game, you have this. You have a sword. You have your armor. You have a high HP stat, and you have a decent stamina stat, decent strength, decent dex, low intelligence, lower faith. Now, in this game, this is just you. You aren't strong yet, even though you're courageous as a knight. You're starting to see that other characters and creatures have these weapons that could or not be stronger than you. And in Dark Souls 2, they have this little system on the mechanics on the butt on like the on the archers, where they can actually hit their shots and hit you, because they want to make it realistic, as best as it can be, where the you can actually get hit and feel the pain. You're getting hit. The archers just don't miss because they miss. So, and and also the other beings, the other enemies, where they just hold their weapons, they chase after you, and they then sooner or later follow you because they want to make it feel like realistic. They don't want to make it like feel like a MMORPG where the enemies follow you, and then when you hit them, they start running away and they're immune, or they start following you, and then they after you go like a decent distance, they look back and they start walking away. They don't want to make it seem like that, because let me remind you, you're in a world where everything is hollow. All these creatures are hollow. They lost their purpose and they are all more dangerous than they were before. And then as throughout the game, you start realizing that these were once people who protected these lands and these kingdoms, all to serve a purpose, a greater purpose. But then they lost that because they started hollowing. So then we had to cross over to Dark Souls 1. Why did the people in Drangleic and, these parts start hollowing? Well, it's because Lord Gwyn from Dark Souls 1 gave all the humans Dark Sign. And all this hollowing started to begin because he was jealous. He never wanted the humans and the beings like this to gain so much power over him, because he knew that one day these guys are going to be able to slay a god For let me remind you, not even the gods are uh, strong enough to, um, you know, get around hollowing, because even Lord Gwyn found out the hard way that the curse he put on humanity also affected him. Because let me tell you that uh, some people are like, but he only did activate it on the humans, right? So why did it hurt him? Well, it's his magic. And he didn't just put it on the humans. You know? He didn't. Let me remind you, not much people knew about magic and how to control it. The flame only gave you so much. And casting a spell could be, a fault sometimes. You don't know the full details. It's like casting a healing spell. It may heal them, but you don't know what parts it healed and how it healed them, or how much power you spent on it. So Lord Gwyn may have cast it and may have cast it on himself on accident. Because throughout the series, you start seeing gods wither. Like, let's say Faram, god of war. He's hollow. Even though, um, after all these years, he seems to still have, a stability, because as you're hollow, you lose your brain. Because you remember, humanity still exists. The more you believe in your ideals and your purpose, you still hold, control. Like Gwyn, he kind of did, but he didn't. He wasn't like a madman, swinging his sword left and right. He still knew his moveset. He still knew who he was, but he didn't have a mind anymore. He still knew what he was. Not in control, but knew what he was. Then there was Faram, god of Gwyn's son, lost his purpose. Turned hollow, even though he achieved what he always dreamed of, to save the dragons, or what's left of them, basically. He got to save them, but he didn't get to save the ancient dragons. Because by far it was too late. Because let me remind you, Dark Souls 1, we slayed one of the last ancient dragons, Calamite, from the sky, and he died. And then we slayed in Dark Souls 2, we didn't slay it, but sooner or later an ancient dragon from Lordran flew over to Dark Souls 2, because either we don't know the reason, but it was either from cowardice or it was just trying to get away from the war, but then it died, maybe from his injuries from it. And then it landed on the mountain, where its soul was extracted by us, the player, because we went back in time due to the Ashen Mist Heart that we gained from the ancient dragon from in Dark Souls 2 to access the past. So we can go through the giants and even the dead ancient dragon statue that was left there near Dyrdux's Freya's boss fight. And, most of them were gone. They were mighty creatures, strongest there was in that age, and they're just gone. Struck down by lightning and slayed by the forces of all the Silver Knights and anything that can get their hands on them. Even demons were fighting the ancient dragons. For this was a war that stirred up everyone from all parts of Lordran. But in Dark Souls 2, you don't see that. You don't see ancient dragons. You see creatures that were fused by Aldia. Aldia is one of the most greatest sorcerers known among, still till this day, strongest sorcerer there was in Dark Souls. For let me remind you, Aldia created the one of the strongest spells known was Soul Geyser, which is the same thing as Soul Stream from Dark Souls 3, and Aldia, I'm pretty sure, also knew how to do this crystal spells from Seath, for that was inside Dyrdux's Freya, which he created from the soul of a giant? A lot of his experiments included the souls of a giant, but we didn't acquire that when we fought the boss, the giant spider. But we knew it was created from one. For Aldea created these monstrosities out of giant souls and mixed it with a little, you know, like let's say Deerdix created a giant two-headed giant spider that can literally shoot beams of freaking magic out of its mouth and command lesser spiders easily by its own, mind. And its armor is impenetrable, strong. The only way to kill it was from its two heads, which were still, let me remind you, very, very strong. The only way our character was able to defeat it was because how strong we were at the time. Canonically, this character was Dirtix Freya was literally one of the lords, just like just literally one of the lords of the place. So of Dark Souls 2, like the Iron King, and even everything, the Rotten, and I'm pretty sure what was Mytha, Painful Queen. No. Iron King, Rotten, Deer Dukes, and his Lost Sinner. That's what it was. Okay. Those four lords you defeat gets you into Drangleic. And the crazy thing is, when the beginning of the game, Dark Souls 2, still to this day, I still find it unique and ironic that you do feel this feeling quite often when when you play the game, when you reach Drangleic. Because when you start the game, you see this old lady, and she says, perhaps you've seen it. Maybe in a dream. A land of cat is like, so she starts explaining dragons, and then she says, one day you would reach the gates of Drangleic, and you would not really know why. That still gets to me every single time. For when you reach that far into Dark Souls 2, you start realizing you've defeated all four of those lords. You've beaten the Iron King, the Lost Sinner, you've beaten the Rotten, and you've beaten Lost Sinner, Iron King, the Rotten, and Deirdre Freya. After all these four lords, you've defeated all of them. But you still you feel like you're missing something. Like, you went this far, it took you so long. It was hours, maybe even days to reach this. You're like, this feeling in your body, it's unbearable because you finally reached Drangleic. Unlike Dark Souls 1, where when you reach past Singe Fortress, you finally reach Anor Londo. And it was in my opinion, very easy to reach, for it was a very short game. I beat under 2 days. It took me to beat Dark Souls 3 under a week. To beat Dark Souls 2 took me months. And this is consistent playthrough, by the way. Multiple deaths. And this is me replaying it after I've beaten it multiple times. And going through, but beating it the first time took me so long. It took me almost nearly a year to beat it. But after playing it multiple times, it took me, I think, 2-3 months back-to-back gameplay. No rest, no sleep, nothing. Drinking all these sodas and all this sugar and food to keep me awake. My will, it was pure rage at its finest. To defeat these bosses knowing that they are alive, made me mad. So I hopped on every single time and try to slay these beasts, these monsters. But then you find out who they once were. Because let me remind you, in Dark Souls 1 and 3, once you defeat a boss, you learn who they were, what they've done, what they've been through, and what their life was. When you know that, it brings you some type of connection with the boss. You know, some people may fight a creature in a game, in the game, like, oh, he was just a villain. He was straight up evil, so I had to kill him. I didn't know who he was. Just wanted to kill him, and then I won. And then you went on with your day. But in Dark Souls 2, as you go through this game, and you start reading, you could look. You don't even have to read half the time. You just have to look around, and you see these places, see all what's going on. Like in Drangleic, once you enter, you see this huge castle in rain. It's dark and stormy. Not how you saw it in the beginning, where it was filled with light and dragons and all this, blinding glory upon this mountain, of course. But when you reach it, it's all rainy and dark, and all these guards, they're attacking you for some reason. You're like, you just reach this far, and of course you're being attacked, but it feels odd. Like, it feels like this place is not what it used to be. For this was the capital of Lord Vendrick, the armed monarch at the time, the king. Let me remind you that Lord Vendrick, King Vendrick, was unstoppable. From what you've known thus far, King Vendrick was a god. And in this world, he owns this world. And I'll get to that. Because in Drangleic, you start noticing that, because from what you heard of Lord Vendrick, he was unstoppable. No weapon could hurt him. But then you go past. You defeat the Looking Glass Knight in a storm, guarding the Shrine of Amana. And then when you go past the Shrine of Amana to defeat the Demon of Song, then you go into the Undead Crypts. And from those two places, you still think, this place doesn't seem right. Why am I here? For in the beginning of the game, it made sense to fight. Because in the places you were, it seemed like there were threats. They were all unique. Unlike, they weren't reused models. They were new places that you've never experienced. So it starts connecting to you as you're going through this game. And you're like, you're connected with all these beings that is, these experiences. That's the better way to put it. Now, as you're going through this game, go through the Shrine of Amana, defeat the Demon Song, you meet the Undead Crypt, where lies down there what is left of King Vendrick. And through the Undead Crypt, it is not as hard as the other places you've met before, for it houses only the dead. It's a catacombs, so you shouldn't reach much enemies, like Dark Souls 1, where it was a horrific nightmare. Unless you knew the path, which I knew from, first try. It was pretty easy, actually, but not to brag, but let me get back to the point. Undead Crypt. Go through there, and you reach the Aghas himself. You've heard of him, but you didn't know where he was. You come to face Velstadt, or Velstadt. The right hand, or Kingsguard, of King Vendrick. Now, you when you meet him, unlike all the other bosses, you know, you start seeing this as more difficult for he is um stronger. But by this time you fight Velstalt, you are, you know, you should be stronger than where you were. So this is a battle between you and him. And basically he's in your way. So you defeat him. It was an uphill battle, very hard. Probably used most of your Estus, but you did it. For Velstalt is both resistant to magic and very combative and aggressive in combat. For wielding a two-handed hammer and also being able to cast spells and to double his damage, the lower his HP goes. So, it was a very hard battle. But you won. You did it. You could finally see King Vendrick. This is your goal, right? But not exactly. Once you defeat him, you head down to a dark room and you see what's left of King Vendrick. He is not dead, but he isn't alive either. You see a withered god. For, let me remind you, hollowing doesn't affect. Hollowing affects even the gods themselves. You saw it from Gwyn. You saw it from Faram. And now you see it on Vendrick. So, when you see it that way, it starts hitting a little different. Because you see this divine being that was so strong in the stories withered. Not the warrior he used to be. And as you see him circle around with his greatsword, with no clothes on, he set them aside, still wearing his crown. I think? I don't know if he's still wearing his crown. Basically, he's circling around just aimlessly. He's still strong. Like, literally, you can walk up to him and start swinging violently at him, and you still wouldn't hurt him, nor do any damage. Even with the strongest weapon in the game, you still can't hurt him. Because then you get something. Get his ring. And with his ring unlocks these seals of these dead giants that you need this Ashen Mist heart to go into. So you can't go to the giants. So you go through Aldia's Keep. Through Aldia's Keep, you start seeing what his brother was up to. Aldia, the greatest sorcerer. Now you start finding out how corrupt he was. A mad sorcerer. Trying his best to find out what and why and how to prevent hollowing. How to create all these things, these mutant creatures stronger and better than before, these monsters. All of this was created under Eldia. It may not be natural, but they were still beasts. Familiars, of course. But then you go at the end. You fight the Guardian Dragon, and then you go all the way to what seems to be the Dragon Shrine. Guarded by Golden Dragon Knights and all these final dragons just flying around, rampant. You don't know if they're real. They probably are all fake. Because, let me remind you, the ancient dragon at the end hosts a soul of a giant and the bone of an ancient dragon. Probably one and only ancient dragons that died on that cliff when you acquire the ancient Ashen Mist heart. But when you acquire this thing, you start going through the giant memories. You start seeing the war the carnage that was committed by King Vendrick's forces to halt the giants from invading their land. For let me remind you, the giants also lost something too. They lost their fudge was a sacred item. It was oh my god, what was it? I know it was a sacred item, but it was some item. They lost something very important to them from the invasion that was when they got invaded beforehand by Vendrick and his knights in his prime. But let me remind you, this is where Vendrick learned of his weaknesses. Remember, he was a god. No man, no beast, no demon, nothing has been able to hurt him but the giants. And then in the giants, he found his weaknesses. He found true fear, for he has never been wounded. And when you're a god and you finally bleed, you start realizing how weak you are to the specific enemy. And then you find out that Vendrick was scared. So when he found out his weakness, throughout this game, you can acquire souls of the giants from all these previously dead giants and these memories, even from the ancient dragon. The more you have, the more you would be stronger, and then you can finally slay Vendrick. But you expect a boss soul. No. You don't get his boss soul. You get I'm pretty sure you get a key to unlock where his soul is. Throughout the game, you can find it in the Shrine of Amana. But, you weren't meant to slay King Vendrick this whole time. You see what he's been through. For he is circling around, and let me remind you that this is all a dream. When you find the faster you find that out in Dark Souls 2 is it all starts coming together. Like Aldia and everyone else, even King Vendrick, the reason why he was circling around the room is because and you can't hurt him, is because, and he's God, it's because this is not where you belong. This is his world, his dream, his everything. Let me remind you that you are supposed to surpass him. So defeating him was meant no purpose. When you begin the game, it tells you specifically to become a new monarch, a new king, to serve and roam these lands better than King Vendrick ever would, never could. But then you start finding out that even when you become king, it still feels empty. So what do? You go to DLCs. You start finding out where the other kings were and what happened to them. Why did Nashandra want to take the throne? Why does she want power? And you start finding out once you play Dark Souls 1, the DLC starts all coming together. Once you defeat Manus, he doesn't really die, for a god can't die in his own domain. He is defeated. He defeated Manus, but he just splits up into 4 pieces. You meet Nashandra, and you defeat her. So there must be 3 more. For in Nashandra's soul, it said she was a part of this primordial being of man, this being of dark And when you look into Manus' soul, you see all this darkness, horrible, leaking out and everywhere. So, what do? You fight the other ones, or you join alliances with them. Find out what they are. So, you go find the other three. One is in the first DLC, the Ivory King and his dearest queen. She is as cold as ice, and in an outburst, her magic is threat, very big threat. When you entered the DLC, when you reach those gates, a giant ice tree and splinters just burst out, breaking the gate. And she tells you to leave, for you don't belong here. And you start seeing this big blizzard everywhere. Her magic is wild, for it is ice everywhere. For she is strong, but she wasn't strong enough to save her king. Her king was the Ivory King, and he was sent down to fight Old Chaos. For let me remind you, the bed of chaos from Dark Souls 1 died. All the fire went away. But there was a new chaos made. In Souls 2, they had their own chaos. And that's where the Ivory King went. Some reason, they never tell us why she never went down there. Perhaps she may have been scared, but her magic was so strong. To make her whole domain under ice? It's impossible to think that, why didn't she just join him and freeze it herself? She could have just took on Old Chaos and froze it. We can't tell. But we do come back with the Ivory King's crown. After finding all of his knights that are willing to die by his side to seal the burnt knights, their brethren, from this never-ending fate of Old Chaos. 2, we go to the Sunken City. We fight a dead king, and that dead civilization turns stone. Then we slay Sinith, the slumbering dragon. Number 3, we go back in time. No, we don't go back in time. No, kinda. We go to the Fume Tower. And in the Fume Tower was where the Iron King had basically his little experiments, I'm pretty sure. This daughter of Manus, how should I put it? She just, I guess, died. But when she died, Nadalia, she gave her power to Raim, the other hand of Vendrick that split apart so far ago. So it was a long time, but Raim wanted his revenge. But he realizes that he can't leave the Fume Tower. For Nadalia, her power only stands here. So, what does he do? He just stays there. He doesn't really do anything. He be's one with a mother that actually accepts him. For Nadalia was probably one of the only nicest daughters of Manus, other than her sister is Ice, and also her sister Nashendra. She took care of Raim when he was defeated, healed him, made him stronger. until we defeated him. And took the piece of Nadalia, and we were able to enter a armor, a room, where it leads us to a samurai armor. And in this armor, you find out that this was one of, because when you enter the Iron King for the Iron Keep for the first time, you see all these samurai soldiers, and you're like, "What's this? Isn't making sense." Like you expect black knights or, champions of all these or fire weapons or something, but they're samurai. And you read their armor. It says these are Alon knights. They serve Alon. And they were trained to serve they served the Iron King. For he didn't really have an army, but he was a king. And he knew how to make things. But since then he created the what was it? Smelter Demon, and the Smelter Demon defeated him, and then he got plunged into the molten lava, then he turned into a giant demon. But he had one guy that served him, and he served him with honor. It was Alon, his right-hand man. And let me remind you, Alon was not just any warrior. He was a formidable warrior from the East. And in the East are these samurai warriors. We don't really venture there in the Souls series, but we do know that warriors from the East are still strong. And they do have a code. So, out of all the battles that you've been through thus far, they've been difficult. But Sir Alon, he holds his ground steady. It takes a lot. And a little too much. For this time, unlike any warrior, this warrior doesn't stand down. And he starts fighting back. And it takes a long time to defeat Sir Alon. He is probably one of the strongest, or maybe the strongest enemy you fought thus far, other than the Foom Knight. And then you defeat him. You get the crown of the Iron King. Thus far, you have Vendrick's crown. You have the Iron King's crown, the crown of the Sunken King, and the crown of the Ivory King. And thus far, you either have all the souls of every Daughter of Manus. For to get the Daughter of Manus' Ice Soul, you have to get, I think, 50 Lois souls from her knights from down below. A lot of grinding. In my opinion, don't do it. If you do want to do it, be prepared to carry about 20 bonfire statics. This grind is freaking real, baby. And have a high drop rate. These things don't drop like candy, they drop like freaking ashes. And there's no such thing as luck in Dark Souls 2. There's only drop rate. So you just had to be very lucky. And funny thing is, when you get her soul, and you get her weapon of the Elium Lois. To the Sunken King, and really get that daughter's soul. And then you get the soul. You get the Bride of Ash. The Bride of Ash's soul. And which is the other Daughter of Manus, Wrath. And then you get Nadalia's soul, which holds these pillars of fire. That is, I think it's Outcry. Probably, in my opinion, my favorite pillar fire move. Because in Dark Souls 1, you have Firestorm, Chaos Storm, and then there was... No, it was like Firestorm, it was Fire Tempest, Firestorm, and then Chaos Storm. And those carry on to Dark Souls 3, I'm pretty sure. Or at least two of them. And then Dark Souls 2, there is Firestorm, Fire Tempest, Chaos. No, it's Chaos something, Chaos Storm. And then there's Outcry, which are 4 different pillar spells of these storms of pillars of fire that rise from the ground and knocking up enemies in their wake. Pretty cool ability. It was pretty cool to see that they put a lot of effort. For Nidalee wasn't using chaos magic; she was using her own flame magic from her own power she got from Menace. Her, piece. She was a piece of Menace, and everything else. You just see that Menace was so much. His soul split, and was all of this. And throughout this game, you just, experience so much. Even though you beat these DLCs and you got all the kings of these, crown of these kings, you just, you've been through a lot at this point in time. And unlike Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, where you beat the game, you're like level 80 to 100. When you beat Dark Souls 2, you probably are around level 300 to 400. And this is no duping at all. The game actually offers this much time. You go through this game and it takes it out of you, it drains you. And beating it once by itself it's enough. And that's on the first playthrough, by the way. Let me remind you that it's the first playthrough. All these hard bosses that even through all these levels you still weren't enough on this first playthrough. So when you beat this game the first time, unlike all the other Souls games where it's easy to beat those bosses, not this one. Dark Souls 1, you're like around under level 100. In Dark Souls 3, you're around level 100. Or around 120 or something like that. Below 150 at best. Dark Souls 3, you're around level 300 to 400. That's a lot. Let me remind you, max level is 800 and something, or 700 and something. It takes it out of you. And unlike Dark Souls 1 and 3, you can go to New Game and not have a problem to fight back. You can go to New Game 3 and multiple times. But in Dark Souls 2, it's a nightmare. You're like, do I even want to go to New Game 2? What horrors are there? And to beat the whole game again? DLC content again? How hard are those bosses gonna be? They nearly knocked the wind out of my HP. I'm at 100 HP. Let me remind you, at this point of the game, you probably have 70 points in Vigor or 80. And in Dark Souls 2, you have that's probably like 2,500, 2,800 HP points. And you're just like, you yourself are, let me remind you, you're just sitting down, realizing this. Like Luddenzalan, this blue smelter demon, the Ivory King, Sir Olan, the Sinith, and the bride, all these hard bosses at the end game were punishing. They knocked off 2,000 HP like it was nothing. Unlike in Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls 1, where when you go in a new game, you can actually survive pretty legitly. They do a lot of damage, but you have a better way to heal. But in Dark Souls 2, you didn't have a good heal. It was hard because your heals took time to heal you. Where when you drunk an Estus, it was very slow. It took, I think, 3 to 4 seconds till your full HP bar would heal up. And if an enemy would, a common trope in Dark Souls 2 is that enemy would attack you and it'll still hit you, but you still heal, but they still couldn't keep up with the damage because how fast they were. They were big and fast, and they had a big weapon that can hit you. And when you would try to get close, they can face your combat faster than you can ever blink an eye. So you take the distance, and even at distance, you still aren't safe. Probably even worse. So, what do you do in this game? You just survive. I've been through this game multiple times, and still till this day, it drains me to even beat the game again. I beat it so many times. It was so worth it. But if you ever played Dark Souls 2, let me tell you this as a bit of advice. Just experience it. Let it flow through. It's a fun game. It's a fun story. Almost perfect if you read about it. It's so fun learning the stories and who you're fighting. And then you get to realize that this was a different game this whole time. This wasn't even a part of Dark Souls 1 or 3. This is a new game. And it was really good. A really, really good game. Thank you for your time. Probably not going to appear here for a while. I'll try to figure out more on my original story, but yeah, this is what I can give you guys. So I guess see you next year. 2024 is coming up soon. This was a really good 2023. I can take it.